I hear a clock ticking somewhere. Okay. Hopefully everybody has returned. Welcome back again. Thanks for listening and watching. The link to morning session will still be accessible after the colloquium. So if you want to listen and watch again, that is certainly possible. Maybe you want to look at it, watch it on your big screen with your super stereo. That would be the best experience, probably. If you have questions about work, the artists are most willing to answer them. You can send your questions to us and we will pass them on. It's also possible that we arrange an encounter with them sometime later. So please let us know if you're interested. And you can give your responses or your questions or the suggestion to have a meeting via mail, of course, but also via our guest book. On our site, there's a guest book, and then there you can say whatever you like, and you can leave whatever you like, even images. So please make use of that. At the moment, Hans, Adriaan, and present. So maybe we should give them an applause just to thank them for being here and giving us this nice experience. Thank you. Yeah, maybe we can take 1 or 2 minutes or 5 minutes to, if somebody wants to ask them something, if they are willing to respond. Is somebody, or is that too quickly? Yes, Hazel?
Hi, now I've seen it, could somebody just explain the process again to me, please? I think it was absolutely beautiful, but I think it would make more sense to me now I've observed.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be possible?
Hans, Adriaan, Elke, do you want to say something?
I can definitely jump in and to say a few words if you want. And thanks, first of all, to this small crowd of watching the film. I think you are the first crowd for the film. It's the first screening of this final result. So that's a great honor to present it like this. I think maybe it's interesting for my part to share it like this. The process is I was entered as the last person in this process. Bert asked initially to Adriaan and Elke, both musicians, to prepare improvisation part for this session. But then they were thinking, okay, but how can we make it interesting visually? And Adriaan invited me to join into the process. And then for my part, I'm a filmmaker. I think that by asking me, I also understood that they were searching for a way to make the visual part of the improvisation part as well, and not merely a registration of this improvisation. So that's where we started, the three of us, thinking of what this improvisation could mean and what this position of filmmaking would be in between this relation of sharing and intersharing of piano and the electronics of Adriaan. And then we started to develop this movement along the piano, because maybe some of you have noticed that although the image is shifting all the time, we don't leave the piano at all. We just stay in the reflection on the Steinway, and that's how the shot is built up. So actually, as a filmmaker, I move like 180 degrees along the piano to just end into the what's the name? I don't know the name of the the sound thing of the Steinway being placed open. So that's what's happening, and somehow that's how also Adriaan and Elke are guided through the process of this 12 minutes playing together. I don't know if Adriaan or Elke would like to add something to this.
Yes, that was very well put, Ans. I think that we could add that in your describing of the film, the little text you were writing this week, you used the word a visual metronome, the camera as a visual metronome. I think that sums it up perfectly, how our music was influenced by your movement. We knew exactly, kind of exactly when Ans was moving in a certain direction, that Elken and I were having 4 minutes left, for example. I'm also searching for the English word of piano clip.
Lid? Just a lid?
The lid,
the lid of the piano,
lid.
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
That's the one, yes.
That's the one.
As she moves around the curve of the piano.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything, Elke?
And maybe also that's, Bert mentioned it briefly, but it was a exercise of trying to find the right resonance in between the three of us. So that's why we did several takes of this improvisation, of this movement. And each time, of course, because it's improvisation, although the image is more or less always the same, there are variations, but still the sound can change completely from one take to another. So we had to search for this take that would, to our opinion, translate this experience or this energy or this, this encounter most precisely. And I think that's the take that we've shared here today.
A very important part of the process was the choosing itself, while normally you have an editing period where you make certain decisions, and now it was not like a notion of this is a good take and this is a bad take, but yeah, it's part of Festival of Loss. So every time we chose something else was lost. So it was like finding a middle ground between everybody happy or finding the film that represents the idea in the best way.
Also moving between grief and epiphany in a way, like we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
All right. So, but maybe, this is very quickly to have to respond to such a thing, but maybe later you come up with ideas or questions, or maybe you want to invite the artist to your own festival or whatever. You can always do that via mail or via this guest book, and whatever you like to say about it can be put there.
There's a hands up from, I think it's Amin.
I can't see it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah.
I lowered down my hand at the end because I thought the discussion is finished. Just I had a question in relation to the video. First, it was brilliant video clip and excellent music. I really enjoyed listening music. So thank you very much. The question I had was about the images you were showing. Suddenly you were going from window to show a tree or more trees outside, and then you were showing the wall there. And is that connected to the pandemic situation, you wanted to show something related to the pandemic or loneliness or something, or just it was accidentally? I think there was an aim, I'm sure, but
It's not accidentally. I think that's for sure, because all the moments in the shots are chosen. I mean, it's scripted. It starts through beforehand. Like we used a very nice. You can see it in the film, but a very nice concert place in Turnhout. And by placing the piano on a specific angle, on a specific moment on the day, we could just move it around so at one part the window would be visible. And although I don't think there is a direct relation with Corona times, for me it was at least very important to somehow open this, very briefly, to open this trio, this ensemble, this moment together towards the outside, to somehow let the outside enter into the film as well. Although it's only a reflection, of course, because everything we see is reflected. But that for me was important. But I would not, of course, it's open to project your ideas upon it. I think this film encourages this, but I think it's more open for us, at least in my opinion, to have this window as a symbolic way to include the viewer, the outside, the environment into the film and the sound as well. And I think Adrien could definitely add on this point on the sound as well, because there always somehow the environment is present, even in the titles in the end.
thank you.
All right. Then maybe more questions later or remarks in another.
Thank you, Bert, also.
Welcome. It was a very nice experience to be there and turn out in Belgium, in that room, seeing things happening and coming to life. Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Okay, but yeah, to make an earthly remark, the clock is ticking. We have to move on to the next part of the colloquium, which will be a presentation by mainly, I think, only Fabian. Jan is present, so he arrived a little bit later. But as I'm told, it was your agreement that you would do the presentation, Fabian, because like Jan stated, it's mainly his work. But maybe you can explain a bit more about that. Yeah, after this perhaps relieving or liberating experience of a musical visual movement, we will focus now on the COVID-related irritating or suffocating experience of affective stasis, because that will be the subject of Fabian's presentation, stasis. So I'll give the floor to you, Fabian.
Thank you very much, Bert. Maybe just to give you a little bit of context, I started working on this concept of affective stasis already a while ago. So actually before the beginning of the pandemic, but it seemed very apt to maybe better understand what is going on right now. And there is a publication, unfortunately, in German, but nonetheless, I will just send you a link so those of you who read German can have a look at it. And one technical remark, I will be reading from my screen, which means that I won't see you, and if my connection should be unstable, please don't hesitate to just shout at me so that I won't be talking into a digital void.
Yeah, You just had your hand on your mic, so be careful that now it's okay. Yeah.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
good that you tell me. So the talk is called On Being Stuck, the pandemic crisis as effective stasis. I hear something, sounds like children.
I muted them. Yeah.
Okay. So when Jan forwarded me the outline to this colloquium, I was very happy to see that there was a pragmatic reference made to Walter Benjamin. Reading Benjamin's name deemed me a positive sign because my work on what I call effective stasis, the work which I will present today, was from its very beginning largely inspired by Benjamin and his way of engaging with the historical present. That's why I would like to start with a motto-like quote from Benjamin. In his famous Passagenwerk, The Unfinished Arcades Project, Benjamin states, quote, "The concept of progress must be grounded in the idea of catastrophe. That things are status quo is the catastrophe. It is not an ever-present possibility, but what in each case is given." End of quote. And I believe that this quote serves quite well to set the stage and also the effective tone for the ideas I want to talk about in the following. In fact, the COVID pandemic can be conceived of as an ongoing catastrophe. We are still right in the middle of it, and we don't know how the situation will play out. The outlook is clouded by uncertainties which seem to emerge almost on a daily level. In light of this, the attempt to think about and reflect on the ongoing present is not an easy task. How can we account for the effective experience of this pathogenic period, as Mbemba called it, if it is still far from being over? In other words, how can we apprehend a historical situation which we, as individuals and scholars, are inevitably enmeshed, so that nothing allows for the distant stance that usually defines the relationship between scholars and their objects of study? The task thus implies what Lauren Berlant has called, quote, conceiving of a contemporary moment from within that moment, end of quote. This is why, within our approach, affect is so important. Borrowing again from Lauren Berlant, we believe, quote, that the present is perceived first affectively. The present is what makes itself present to us before it becomes anything else, such as an orchestrated collective event or an epoch on which we can look back. End of quote. Against this backdrop, the best we can do and the best I have to offer is to take a few tentative steps and gently point in directions which might be helpful in making sense of the status quo we're living in. In the title of this colloquium, Reflections on a Post-COVID Landscape, there was an expression which immediately caught my attention: post-COVID landscape. This sounds a bit like what comes after the apocalypse. The phrase evokes the notion of an irreversible disaster, as if a massive storm has gone over the earth, devastating its surface forever. There is no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic is an event of global dimensions. And there can also be no doubt that this event brought drastic changes. On the other hand, however, one cannot easily get rid of the impression that at the end of the day, things did not change that much at all. There was a short break, a wrinkle in time that seemed capable of taking up the seat of another future, a future in which neoliberalism, to borrow a phrase from the program, would not be victorious again. But already after a short time, this seed seemed to have withered away. After the pause, there came the reset, but neither the fault was cleared nor the code rewritten. Business as usual resumed its throne. The world has not been devastated by the virus. COVID only made visible how devastated and structurally flawed it already had been before. Although many governments made huge efforts to handle the crisis, one cannot help but feel that below all this activity, the status quo prevailed. How can this perseverance be explained? We believe that this question touches not only on political and social sciences, but also on cultural affect studies. The basic question Jan and I started to think about thus is the following. What is the general affective climate or affective condition of the pandemic crisis? How can we describe and conceptually account for it? And what does this affective condition tell us about the state of late modern societies in general? Obviously, people experience the pandemic in manifold ways. The affective experience of the crisis is by no means homogeneous. Nonetheless, we believe that two affective complexes particularly stand out. On the one side, there's a strange new kind of affective exhaustion. Being forced to stay at home, diminish social interactions, and drastically reduce the scope of their everyday mobility, many people experience a blurry disarray of boredom, sluggishness, and strain. While state-imposed pandemic policies change with rapid frequency, everyday life remains strangely unmoving. Since the beginning of the pandemic, a sense of being stuck unfurled, as if not only social life, but time itself had come to a halt. This sense of being stuck comes very close to the state Adam Grant described as languishing in an influential article in the New York Times, published in April 2021. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, languishing means, quote, to weaken, wither, or become faint, to live in an oppressive or dispiriting place, situation, or condition, to fail to make progress, to be unsuccessful, to droop in spirits, to pine or brood, to waste away with longing for, to yearn, to do something, to grow slack, lose vigor or intensity. End of quote. In this New York Times article, Grant himself describes languishing as a sense of stagnation and emptiness. It feels as if you're muddling through your days, looking at your life through a foggy windshield. This was also a quote by Grant. These descriptions seem quite apt to capture the affective inertia during lockdown. At the same time, however, they miss an important point. Living under the conditions of a constantly prolonged state of emergency made people not only more tired, but also more irritable than usual. Inside homes, there's not only more drooping and brooding, but also more shouting and nagging. And in the few public spaces which remained accessible during lockdown, more and more often one can see people clashing with each other. Exhaustion thus only captures one side of the picture. It accounts for the low intensity affects, the fatigue and inertia, but it fails to apprehend their high intensity flip side. Of course, there is tiredness, but at the same time and in its shadow, there's also the looming inkling that at any moment things, including oneself, might explode. Sometimes it feels as if there's nothing but a thin membrane between exhaustion and explosion, ossification and upheaval. Grandmaster Flash's 1982 message, "Don't push me, because I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head," can be conceived of as 2021's hidden refrain. Enduring under pandemic conditions involves living permanently in the vicinity of this edge. In fact, this might be one reason why people became so exhausted during the pandemic. It's energy zapping to be constantly balancing on the edge of a cliff. The attempt not to lose one's head, nerves, or temper affords a permanent effective labor, which for the most part goes unnoticed. The notion of languishing captures the feeling of being stuck, but it misses its backside, the emotional edginess, the growing tension, the latent aggressiveness. Political polarization is on the rise. Not only in Germany, but also in many other countries, the streets are regularly occupied by unsettling scenes of protest. The longer the crisis lasts, the more one can sense an atmosphere of latent aggression in social media, in politics, in everyday micro-encounters. Politicians, medical professionals, and scientists are threatened and attacked. In online chat groups, right-wing terrorists rant about overthrowing the state. Underneath the imposed calm, a mixture of more uncanny affects seems to be accumulating. Two elements thus seem to be characteristic for the affected climate during the pandemic: existential exhaustion on the one side and political polarization on the other. Jan and I do believe that these two, at first glance incongruous affective states, are, in fact, intricately related to one another. Both of these states, the feeling of being stuck on the one side and the feeling that this tranquility might be nothing but the calm before a storm on the other side, belong together. And the concept of affective stasis might help us in better understanding how exactly this relation looks like and how it works. Through a re-articulation of the ancient Greek notion of stasis, we want to make a conceptual proposal which might enable us to better understand the affective climate of the pandemic, in which stagnation and flux, inertia and change come to intertwine in peculiar ways. So what exactly does stasis mean in ancient Greek, and when we transfer this notion to our present? Let's start answering this question by revisiting the ancient Greek semantics. Unlike other ancient Greek words, the term stasis never really made it into the everyday lexicon of modern-day English. You will hardly hear it in ordinary conversations. The only domain in which the word has been able to gain a firm foothold in contemporary English is medicine. In medical terminology, stasis basically refers to, quote, the stagnation or stoppage of the circulation of any of the fluids of the body, end of quote, which normally, that is, when the vital functions are running smoothly, are in motion. Not every form of stagnation or immobility, thus, is to be understood as stasis, but only the immobility of something that is supposed to be constantly moving. Depending on the type of bodily fluid, medicine distinguishes between different forms of stasis, such as hemostasis or lymphatic stasis. Such congestions can be dangerous and pathogenic. Prolonged constipation, for example, can result in a gradual self-poisoning of the body. Outside the relatively well-delineated domain of medicine, however, the word is rarely used nowadays. In ancient Greece, the situation was different. Depending on the context, stasis could take on a wide array of meaning, of meanings, which, again, depending on the context, branched out into an increasingly finely differentiated semantic field. Here's a selection of the meanings one can find in the most decisive lexicon of ancient Greek, the so-called Little Scott Jones. Placing, setting, standing stone, pillar, erection, building, standing still, stationariness, standing, stature, rest, constipation, sluggishness, status, state of affairs, position, state, condition of a person, especially her moral, social, political position, party, company, band, especially a party formed for seditious purposes, faction, sedition, discord, division, dissent. In navigation, stasis could mean the position in relation to the compass. In rhetoric, the position or opinion of a philosopher. In ancient sports, the position of a boxer, and in the realm of law, the position taken up by a litigant. In fact, these are not all the meanings you can find in this dictionary. As broad as this semantic field is, as difficult it is to make sense of it. What holds all these different meanings together? The direction of an answer is pointed out by the consideration that stasis at the same time is both a positional term and a postural term. It does not only answer to the question where a particular body stands, but also to the question how this body is standing. All usages, in one sense or another, refer to the position of bodies in a specific space. No matter whether this is a courtroom, a boxing ring, a political assembly, or the social fabric as whole. Stasis, thus, is always about situatedness in a comprehensive sense, not only understood as spatial position, but also as social, political, moral, and affective one. Conceptualizing stasis as situatedness involves thinking through the ways in which position and posture, standing, status, and stance are interdependent. The ancient understanding of stasis suggests that your possibilities, what you can do and what you can be, strongly depend on where and how you are standing. Your stasis suggests certain reactions and precludes certain others. To give one example, in boxing, a left winger is more likely to attack with a right arm. That means that in a basic stance or fighting position, certain moves are more preordained than others. This comprehensive idea of situatedness is well captured in the English translation of stasis as stand, standing, or stance. In fact, the Greek word stasis and the English words standing and stance etymologically share the same root. Stasis, however, is not only a positional and postural term, but also, and even in the first place, a political one. The political sphere, that is, the space of the polis, was the realm in which the notion of stasis became particularly relevant. And this is where things get really interesting. For contrary to their idealized image, the Greek polis were by no means havens of harmony. On the contrary, there were frequent internal conflicts that threatened to destroy the unity of the polis from within. It was characteristic of these conflicts that two hostile groups were facing off, competing for political power. In the ancient political vocabulary, stasis referred not only to these factions, but also to the disintegration of the polis itself, its polarization and falling apart into two factions, as well as to the conflicts that arose from this division. Often these conflicts grew extremely violent. Stasis became a word for uprising, revolution, and civil war. In the ancient world, such upheavals were widespread. According to Josiah Ober, quote, "Stasis was a terror that perpetually stalked Greek political landscape," end of quote. Taking the polis as central reference, the various ways in which the word stasis was used in ancient Greek can be arranged into the following sequence. Quote, "The word stasis actually means stance, but it underwent shifts of meaning as follows. 1, stance. 2, standpoint. 3, group of people with the same standpoint. 4, in the plural, 2 or more groups with opposing standpoints. 5, the split between groups. And 6, civil war," end of quote. The political meaning of stasis is not independent from its usage as positional and postural term. The unwillingness to give up one's standpoint and take a different stance, in other words, the foreclosure of movement, was one of the reasons why conflicts in the polis frequently grew into civil wars. We now have got an idea of what stasis meant in the ancient Greek world. But what exactly does effective stasis mean when we transfer this notion to the historical present? In the following, I will sketch out how to forge the ancient semantics of stasis into a conceptual framework that might us help better understand the ongoing crisis. As already indicated, affective stasis does not denote a single emotion, but a broader affective condition. As working definition, we propose to understand this condition as characterized by a lack of affective plasticity. Affective plasticity refers to the ability to affect and be affected in heterogeneous and ever new ways. Although this lack can be described in psychological terms, it is important to pay tribute to the semantic traces which draw a close line between stasis and the political. Affective stasis does not simply fall out of the blue. Rather, it has to be understood as resulting from particular social and political conditions. There are governmental technologies and institutional arrangements which, wittingly or unwittingly, produce affective stasis. Think, for example, of prisons, refugee camps, or detention centers. The political production of affective stasis, however, can also come along in much more subtle forms, which work without any visible form of coercion. Conceptually, affective stasis is clamped between two opposite poles: immobility on one side and disruption on the other. During the pandemic, medicine and politics became particularly important. In fact, these two domains are also particularly helpful when it comes to explaining the nature of this polarity. They mark the opposite directions that define the scope of what stasis can be. Congestion or stagnation of fluids within a single body in medicine, taking a stand, hardening of the fronts, revolt and civil strife within a community composed of many individual bodies, politics. The movement from one pole to the other does not take place smoothly, though, in a gentle glide, but discontinuously and abrupt. Between immobility and disruption, standstill and upheaval, there's a peculiar tipping point, a critical threshold. It marks the point at which things can no longer just go on as they are, and the status quo abruptly changes. Both poles come along with specific affective qualities. The feel of the immobility pole can be largely described in terms of deprivation, as loss of intensity, vigor, or emotional fluency. When tending to this pole, affective stasis acts passivating and stiffening. The effective tonality connected to the pole of disruption is more difficult to grasp, since the underpinning affects often remain blurry and latent. Like an approaching storm, it can only be inferred indirectly from subtle changes in the affective atmosphere. One feels that something is in the air without being able to precisely pin it down. It's not the disruptive event itself, but rather that which comes right before it. A heightened sense of tension, a nervous twitch in the eye, and an electric crackle. Even if this affective state is experienced as intensity increasing, it still has something to do with a lack of affective plasticity. The polarization which precedes the disruptive event, no matter whether this refers to civil wars in the ancient world or to violent clashes between anti-vaxxers and police forces nowadays, results from a political impasse in which neither side is willing to move. The obduracy of enmity and hatred also points to a lack of effective plasticity. Immobility and disruption also differ in terms of their temporality. Whereas the immobility pole is related to a sense of slowdown and stagnation, the disruption pole is related to a sense of precipitous and often catastrophic acceleration. Affective stasis thus accounts for both. The dull routine in which it feels like nothing is changing at all, and the sudden disruption, which feels like all things are about to be overthrown. It is precisely this polarity which makes the concept well suited for capturing the general affective climate during the crisis. While it is true that the virus urged us to unlearn old habits, it is also true that the new routines we developed instead very soon became stifling and sour. Even for the more privileged, domestic space under lockdown turned into a space of confinement. Being locked up in the same rooms with the same individuals, following the same routines day after day, amounted to the feeling of being stuck both in space and time. With the return of the same thing over and over again, there came not only feelings of exhaustion and powerlessness, but also aggressiveness and frustration. On the political and social level, the virus put forth new divisions and, at the same time, intensified those that were already present before. While social life slowed down, political disintegration accelerated. Conceiving of the pandemic crisis as affective stasis involves conceiving of immobility and disruption as being two sides of the same coin. The sense of being stuck feeds into the general inkling that we are living in a world in which the words future and openness cease to couple in a stable relationship. Being stuck and being late are affective kin. If there is a dominant emotion of the pandemic, it might be the feeling that whatever measurements and actions are taken, we are still too late to avert the catastrophe. Against this backdrop, it seems to be no coincidence that many intellectuals who commented on the pandemic draw a close line to the ecological crisis we are facing. According to Achilles Mbembe, humanity finds itself in a planetary impasse that can only be overcome by a disruption of global dimensions. Myself being unable to end this talk on a happier and less murky note, I leave the last words to him. Quote from Mbembe: "There is no doubt that the skies are closing in. Caught in the stranglehold of injustice and inequality, much of humanity is threatened by a great chokehold as the sense that our world is in a state of reprieve spreads far and wide. If, in these circumstances, a day after comes, it cannot come at the expense of some, always the same ones, as in the ancien economy, the economy that preceded this revolution. It must necessarily be a day for all the inhabitants of Earth, without distinction as to species, race, sex, citizenship, religion, or other differentiating marker. In other words, a day after will come, but only with a giant rupture, the result of radical imagination. End of quote, and that's also the end of my talk.
That was wonderful, really fantastic. The constipation metaphor running throughout was powerful. Bert, are you taking up the questions here, or will I?
Yeah, please continue. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, everybody. Thank you, Fabian. That was really, really interesting. Very, very dark, very powerful. And I'm just wondering, have we any questions or comments? If you'd like to turn on your cameras again, on your mics again, and we'll take and raise your hand, and we'll take you in. Carmen, I see you're the first one up there. And then okay, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, I really enjoyed that, Fabian. I can see, you know, we're interested in some of the same things, and I really love the way you developed that. And I enjoyed the way you used the term plasticity, and it got me thinking about the way in which resilience discourse has been kind of a core feature, and you use it in a different way, which I was really happy to see, because resilience, you know, Sabina talks about this, and a number of people talk about this. Resilience is something that's been used to kind of individualize and sort of decollectivize, you know, responsibility for coping and displace it onto the individual. And it can be a real kind of neoliberal, or maybe, you know, in terms of what we were talking about earlier, you know, necroliberal kind of type of terminology, you know, in really interesting ways. And I got a very strong sense that you use plasticity in a different way. So I guess I'm, you know, I guess I just want you to maybe respond to that. Do you have any thoughts about what I've said there?
Thanks, Carmen. Yeah, first of all, it's very deliberate that I refrain from using the word resilience, because I also see all the problems that you hinted at. And yeah. Actually, the reason why I talk about effective plasticity is more one connected to the whole discourse of affect studies, because there is this basic idea that affect is something very fluent, very moving. And on the one side, I do agree with it, but on the other side, there's sometimes also this transformative potential of affect seems to be overemphasized in my view. So one of the basic motivations for me to start thinking about stasis is that I do not see personally that so many things change. And I believe that the resistance to change is also something which is very much fostered by affect. And this is one of the basic reasons why I started to think about how inertia is also effectively supported, if you like.
Fantastic. Okay. I think Demonkus, you were next.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. And as I've been listening to you, what came to my mind is another notion which before the pandemic has been quite frequently used in critical theory, that is acceleration and acceleration society. And I think it's a really interesting tension here. because on the one hand, I can understand absolutely why you've been talking about stasis, and I've been doing a lot of interviews, and many people has been emphasizing these similar experiences. But on the other hand, many people have been experiencing the acceleration aspect of the pandemic as well, because that is also, it's been happening so quickly, and the newer and newer waves are coming so quickly also, and it is inseparable from the accelerated dynamics of global capitalism, I think. So what I would suggest, and what I would like to hear from you, is to think a little bit about, or reflect a little bit about on the clash of these two dynamics. On the one hand, there is still an ongoing pressure of acceleration. On the other hand, there is this forced stillness, and how the two are clashing. What could be the outcomes of it? I have no answer to this, but maybe that's an interesting way to explore it.
Yeah, thank you for this proposal. I also think that it would be very much worth thinking about this relationship. And maybe just to give a very provisional answer, I believe that acceleration in this neoliberal sense is very much, one could say, one of the stabilizing factors of the status quo, because what is accelerating is not, it's, at least in my view, it's not really some fundamental changes, but just mechanisms that help stabilizing, you know, the system, the world we're living in. And yeah, but I will have to think more about this. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Bert, I think you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. Yeah, please let me be the devil's advocate for a moment, because I think I'm totally not an expert in ancient Greek language, but I think there are many words in that language that mean the opposite, that have opposite meanings, like eroeo, which means streaming and resting at the same time. So isn't this concept of stasis connected to a life experience in ancient Greece that is totally different from ours? So can we use such a concept from such a very different context in our present day context? I'm struggling with same kind of question, so I'd like to ask you this question as a devil's advocate.
I don't think this question is as sinister and devilish. It's a very legitimate question, and of course it's problematic to use an ancient concept and then transfer it as it is to the historical present, but this is not what I'm trying to do. So the ancient semantics are more like the you know, like the soil, and on this soil I try to build up a conceptual framework which is inspired by this polarity which you find in ancient Greece. And in fact, I spent weeks just deep diving in dictionaries because there seems to be a whole different form of thinking, positionality and agency connected to this idea of stasis. And what you find in literature is that they usually just talk about the political dimension, which is very interesting, and there are a lot of very good historical works on it. But like these basic meanings, meanings like standing, stance, position, status, they are a bit forgotten. And this is what I also try to excavate and to put it in a to actualize it.
may I come in for just a moment on that? Because I like the use of stasis, and you know, okay, so Wittgenstein says someplace that the use of words teach you their meaning. So etymology is one way in, the other way in is the kind of usage, right? And one of the ways in which stasis appears in kind of modern parlance is something like a civil war, or even trench warfare, those kind of things that you know, are stalemates and so on. So World War I being a kind of classic kind of watershed of that, you know, the stasis of the trenches and the fronts and so on and so forth. And it seems to me that the question is really what you see is intensifications and accelerations at the level of the development of technology and so on, while everything else stays as it is. So machine guns, gas, tanks, anthrax, and so on, all very bad stuff in that sense. And that's kind of what we're seeing in some way mirrored here as well. You know, the rehabilitation of big pharma, for instance, you know, and biotech and all of that kind of thing, and of course Zooms and Teamses and all of the media tech, which is just about intensifications of stasis, you know, intensifications of rivalry, intensifications of heated conflict and so on. So you can have stasis with all of those accelerations going on at the same time. But just to stay with that kind of register then for a bit, you know, if we're talking about civil war as kind of the usage of a war in deadlock as a usage here, you know, what's beyond that? You know, how do such things as civil wars stop being civil wars? What are the moments that they can of truces and treaties and new developments and so on? What are those horizons here? Or do we just see intensification of destruction and self-destruction?
Well, in the ancient world, it wasn't so much about truces, because it really was about not only gaining political power, but changing the whole system, which means just changing the constitution, you know, from democracy to oligarchy or tyranny and so on. But the way I use the term, I at least want to hold open the possibility that stasis can also refer to something like, for example, the French Revolution, or this big disruption Mbembe dares dreaming of and talk about. So in my view, what we actually see is that most of these disruptive events are ones don't want to have, you know, fostered by right-wing political forces, but there's still at least the possibility that there might be something like a fundamental change, and this is which also is which I found very important in the program of this colloquium, that there was this very short period at the beginning of the pandemic where this room of possibilities seemed to open up for a short period of time.
I agree, very much so. So we have a couple of people who want to come in. I think Ray, you want to come in, and then Yanis. Ray first.
Thanks a million for the talk. It was really fascinating. And forgive me if I didn't quite get it in its entirety. But you seem to be focusing on the stasis element of the conceptualization. I was wondering if you might say something a little bit more about the affective, or how you're using the idea of affectivity. It does seem to me that there's an atmosphere of a dystopian, kind of Beckettian response to stasis in the way you're presenting your theorization. And that kind of links to, I don't know, capital realism, in the sense there's no alternative and the stuckness of things. But In other areas, stasis is considered quite optimistically and positively. In my own field, organization studies, we think of organizations as stasis. Like one theorization of an organization is that it's an intervention into the changing world to hold it together and keep things keep things related for a period of time and organized before they disorganize and disassemble and the stream continues to flow. I just wonder, I go back to the question, how does affective and where are you drawing the construct of affectivity from? And maybe if you'd make some comments on that, I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the paper. Thank you.
Yeah, I would also like to hear more about this idea of conceiving of organizations as stasis. I didn't hear that before. So I'm working at a collaborative research center called Affective Societies. So it's all about affect studies. And before I did my PhD in a organization which was all about emotion studies, and there has been like this emotional turn followed by the affective turn, and this is now just a very general characterization, but one of the biggest differences between the category of emotion and the category of affect is that affect, at least the way we think it in Berlin, is much more relational. So it's not so much about inner states or even mental states, but something which evolves between different persons, different bodies within specific environments, and it is less determined in a way. So when you talk about emotions such as envy or anger or hate, please interrupt me if I'm boring you because you know all of that. But then there are already like distinct categories, words, and then which of course are culturally and historically informed and shaped. And affect is more, affect can turn into distinct emotions, but it can also stay like more on the subliminal, latent level. And I believe that much of what is going on in social situations actually is going on this subliminal level. This is why I deem affect to be a good or helpful tool. And maybe just one very short remark, that what I also did not like that much or don't like that much about this whole affect discourse is, as it is very much highlighting transformativity, virtuality, it's also, at least in its classical formations, very optimistic and very positive. And this whole idea of stasis also a little bit meant as a kind of correction to this tendency within affect studies discourse.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. We'll go to Yanis for one last question, and then we'll pass over to John O'Brien. So Yanis, go for it.
Hello. I had a comment, and it's just funny that when you started talking about Stasi, I don't know why, I thought in my head you were going to talk about the German secret police, and I was like, oh, this is getting somewhere, but it wasn't, and it's actually much more interesting where you got talking, and indeed, like, something I just wanted to comment on, which is I think we're still completely part of, is not a Stasi police system, hopefully not completely, but the idea of stasis that you use from the Greek, and I love this reference that you make, is central in the idea of being and being present somehow. But nonetheless, interesting is also the word ecstasis. I don't know if you went through that in your paper, and maybe I missed it out, but this idea of ecstasis that instead is this of being outside of something, trying to just not being present, quite the opposite of stasis as you describe. And a lot of the pandemic has kind of tried to show that in the way in which, especially with lockdowns, the idea was of yeah, it's tough. Lockdowns are tough, but we got Disney Plus and we got internet and we got video games, and we manage somehow. We have all these things that are quite wonderful. I remember clearly a friend of mine making kind of the reference of war, and we mentioned this before about think about when the war was happening and people wouldn't know anything about their sons for months and months and months fighting in the trenches. But now we got internet, it's great, and we're just locked at home watching Disney Plus. We don't have anything to complain about. And it was kind of a denial in my head about what was going on, the consequence of what is going on. But also it is a sort of ecstasy of we have these wonderful tools and they're making all of this so comfortable. Let's just enjoy it. In Germany, I think there was a video, there was like an advertisement about fighting the COVID war, and they kind of interview a gentleman, and he's an elderly man, and they were like, so how was your COVID war? And he was like, oh, it was very tough. You know what I had to do? Nothing, just sit in the couch all day. And you have this picture of this guy and sitting on the couch, just being bored and watching TV and being like, do the hardest thing ever, don't do anything. And it was something like, yeah, it was ironic on the fact that we used to have people fighting as soldiers, but now we're just asking you to be on the couch, don't complain. I wonder if you came across any of this. This is kind of being out of it in a way, not being there, but being external and be constantly, I don't know really what I'm trying to say, but I think there's a connection there. Maybe you can answer it.
I don't think so, but what I get from your remarks is that you're saying that there is something like an ecstatic desire also, and Disney Plus and so on is like just some machine producing numbness, which just pretends to fulfill or meet this desire, but actually this desire is directed at something else, something which is really outside, right?
Absolutely, yeah, I would say so. Yeah. I would have this feeling, but it's an impression in any case.
I mean, just one observation in this context, which I believe many of you will share, that in Germany, also many other countries, there was this discourse about young people meeting secretly to rave and party. I guess it still continues until today. And I have, although of course it is dangerous, I have so much sympathy for these young people. And here in Berlin, I live close to a park, which used to be like the secret venue, which frequently, was a venue for raves. And then the police went in, and then people just dispersed and met again. So this might, in a way, be related to this ecstatic desire. No?
That's a good segue to John, I think. So thank you, Fabian. Thank you for the questions and responses, everybody. And we'll just pass over now to John O'Brien. Thank you, John. The floor is yours.
Yes, Kieran. Okay, well, hello, everybody. I've been really enjoying people's papers as I've been sitting kind of silently listening to the questions and discussions. This is my attempt at a brief intervention, so I'm just going to launch into it. And I'll read the paper. So the coronavirus pandemic has been caused by the breaking of boundaries and intensification of the chains of interdependence, just as all pandemics have. Plagues and pandemics are ultimately driven by globalization in the guise of empire building, state formation, trade, the movement of people, and an intensification of harvesting resources, such as in high-density housing of animals, or opening up of new regions or species for human consumption. The story is always some mix of soldiers, traders, communications, and animals being brought into deeper and wider and more intense circulation. Ancient pandemics, though they stemmed from expansion, had a tendency to result in political fragmentation, but the transition to modernity can be seen in how they result in a further intensification of the chains of interdependence and the further breaking of boundaries. While the Athenian, Antonine, Cyprian, Justinian plagues, and the Black Death led to a decivilizing process, unraveling much of the advance of political powers, modern plagues have led less clearly to centrifugal effects, linked instead with innovations in disciplinary techniques, such as those famously deriving from leprosariums. While we are more in it together than before, we are together apart in complicated ways, which can be seen in everyday interaction. The COVID-19 pandemic represents above all an enormous intensification of the content of modernity, swamping subjective experience. This is evident in the authority it is given to expertise, in the extensions of surveillance technology, in globalization, economic ripple effects, and strategies for nudging behavior. The alienating dynamics in modern culture, such as the domination of subjective experience by objective culture, by being a unit and a vast mechanism, repulsion and reserve in interaction, disturbance of the sensory and sensuousness in interaction have increased. Societies with lots of bonding social capital suffered badly. The dialectic between alienation and enchantment that makes modern life subjectively bearable has been disrupted. Delving into the micro level, our apartness together can be seen most clearly with sociability, which as the key vector of transmission became a focus of regulation as a crucial step to protect life. Alcohol, as the accelerant of sociability, became a source of social concern in new ways, but almost everywhere prohibition was considered a step too far. Moral policing of private behavior has thus increased, with scandals over social mixing replacing sexual scandal as the ender of political careers. Drinking has been used for symbolic politics, whether representing state versus community, or Republican virtue versus private selfishness in Ireland, or the threat to the supposedly essentialist liberal soul of the British from the pandemic, expressed famously by Boris Johnson in People's Right to the Pub. Thus, mundane daily acts have become part of a great public drama rather than remaining quotidian and local. But the intensification of interdependence through the pandemic is not only in a disciplinary form that has left us apart, but also in a sociable and even playful form that has brought us together. Pandemics make nonsense of social Darwinism and aristocratic exceptionalism. The marginalized may suffer most, but privilege does not provide a complete escape. Despite the belief in the association between pandemics and scapegoating, they are in most cases linked with a tendency to place blame on the shoulders of the community for creating the conditions where a pandemic could become so devastating. They tend to result in a commitment to renewed solidarity to gird interdependencies, to practical public health policies, and new rituals that underpin the evident need for solidarity. These rituals span those that express concern, show respect, emphasize orderliness and cleanliness, or those that allow the experience of collective effervescence for people undergoing the same thing. These are civilizing moments of showing respect and consideration to others, as social capital is as important as medical capacity. But as sociability has acted as a collective effervescence that commits people to public health, it has also become disordered and disrupted. Returning to alcohol, the pandemic has witnessed a great acceleration in the privatization of drinking. Zoom parties became rarer, but glasses continue to be filled. The taboo against home drinking that once existed is further broken. A split appears between drinkers, with heavy consumers drinking more and moderate drinkers drinking less than before, as the drinking occasion has become destructured, and an acceleration in the process of premiumization, as everyday drinks are replaced with heavily branded products aimed at social distinction. However, painful, melancholic longing for public pleasure and sociability is widely evident. The pub, in many places, represents a romantic, capitalist ideal of personalistic business conducted by owner-proprietors. Concentration and massification of the pub and hospitality sector is on the horizon, however, as major pubcos will aggressively enter the market and acquire vacated licenses of the small fish who could not survive the interruption to their business, leaving us with more chains and less quirkiness. The masters of ceremony, publicans, bar staff, waiters, whose structured ritual sociability have been out of work for years on long furloughs, and many shifting into serving the private consumption of privileged secure workers in other ways. So what we have witnessed in the pandemic is the transformation of sociability in a messy dialectic of alienation and sociability in the context of the massifying effects of the pandemic. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was very, very nice, very focused and excellent. So we have some time for some questions, comments, interactions. Anybody with the hands up? Very interesting, I think, to talk about the transformation of sociabilities in this sense, as that might be the fundamental effect. Bert, you have your hand up. Let's.
Yeah, just asking about transformations, but also sort of highlighting of existing patterns. In what way what you're describing is new, and in what way is it sort of emphasizing things that were already there? Could you say something about that?
So highlighting patterns of sociability that were already there. I don't know, I suppose like one of the things that I wrote a paper on this, and what I identified was like the personalistic quality of the pandemic. You know, I think like this kind of what we've seen in recent history is, you know, this kind of, you know, we can use these kind of like big kind of sociological ideas like individualization and, you know, reserve and things like this, and the kind of the emptying out of kind of public life and, you know, rapid social change. One of the things that I think was really remarkable at the beginning of the pandemic was, I think, kind of the intensification of sociability. And it almost kind of felt like the return to kind of traditional social forms, you know, like kind of talking to neighbors, kids out for a walk with their parents, gangs of kids on bicycles, just cycling places just for the sake of being out of the house. You know, so I think like in a way what it did, I guess, in kind of existing patterns of sociability is it kind of these traditional forms, which in some way felt kind of tenuous or kind of on the edge of being lost, I think came back. And I think it kind of speaks a little bit to this sense of kind of maybe the optimistic side of the pandemic, even though despite all of the things, because it has been very alienating and real surge in kind of the privatization of life. But at the same time, it has intensified kind of like personal relations and, you know, people encountering each other as personalities, and, you know, has had some kind of like new kind of like rituals of civility in terms of how we interact with each other.
Yes. Carmen, mic is on.
Yeah, John, I absolutely love that. Sorry, I'll turn on my video. And I guess I was just wondering how much that experience, which I experienced as well, too, the kind of intensification and sort of transformation in forms of sociability, very, very powerful in Ireland. And it was very uplifting to kind of experience that despite everything here in Ireland. But I guess I'm wondering if that might be experienced quite differently, if different societies with different types of, you know, patterns and rituals and cultures and so on might experience different things in different ways, if you know what I'm saying. So I guess I'm just wondering if there's been transformation, if there's any way to think of transformations in drinking patterns and patterns of sociability that might be different in other countries. Sorry, that's not that clear, but I guess I wanted to ask is, what do you think is the future of the pub as well? Because that's a huge question. It's quite, as you know, quite massive in terms of the, you know, Irish culture and identity.
Yeah, I mean, that was really kind of, I suppose I started with kind of a big picture and I wanted to kind of zoom down into that as the focus. Yeah. And like, I think, you know, it's a really nice kind of litmus test or kind of lens for looking at what's happened to social relations, because, you know, I guess sociability and maybe like alcohol consumption is when people come together and when, you know, society realizes itself in interaction. I mean, like, I think it's those things that I said, it's privatization.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you're moving towards more like aesthetic experiences rather than kind of like, you know, messy interpersonal experiences that are more about the interaction. You know, I think it's going to be about the massification of culture, you know, the concentration of the industry. Mm-hmm. You have privatization, you know, and like, I suppose these are kind of the new patterns that are emerging out of it, because like a lot of these things are like they're very, very new, you know. I mean, like the old social form, like you had like the drinking occasion and kind of the ritualization of social life, which structured like our consumption and our affects and all of those kind of things. And those forms that we kind of still kind of sort of remember, but they're really falling apart very quickly. And these new forms are kind of emerging kind of quite quickly. So I think those are like the buzzwords I would say for what it is going to be.
Yeah, and almost a reconstitution of the forms of sociability that used to be central to the pub, outside during the walk and outside during, you know, all kinds of other things like that, because it still persists here, but in reconfigured ways, right?
Yeah, and as some wise people have talked about, is the rebirth of the shebeen, because in a way it's kind of you know, we're returning to the Middle Ages in the context of the pandemic, because, you know, I'm kind of stealing a point of Kieran now. I think I've heard Kieran talk about this, but you know, the licensing system as like as a disciplinary modern institution, what the pandemic has done is it's blown that apart, and you get the disorderly houses, which none of our houses are disorderly houses, but you do get like the reappearance of the shebeen in people's back gardens. And so it's interesting kind of, I suppose it was coming out from a Simmelian kind of ideas, because you're looking at these different things that are existing at the same time. And you have like, on the one hand, hypermodernity, and on the other hand, it gives birth to the re-medievalization of society in some ways, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, fantastic.
Like that combination of Elias and Zemel there, you know, is kind of, there's complementarity and also tensions. But anyway, over to you, Dimonkas, and actually we might segue now towards into you, World, anyway, to bring things to a close and talk also about the conference in Budapest coming up.
Yeah, sure, because time is up, you're absolutely right, but I just wanted to say one thing to John, because it was quite interesting. And I think your last words were really resonating with me, because what I had as an experience is that there are parallel lifers emerging. And one very typical example, which surprised me at the beginning, is that how differently people, for example, in the countryside, in small villages, and people in the big cities reacted to the whole pandemic situation. And it's been absolutely different, because it was like in many smaller villages where I've been having contacts with relatives, and I've been, I had the experience that people are, for them, the pandemic is not a reality in many ways. Their life had not been changed. Going to the shops, social distancing, going to pubs, this was not happening at all, because for them somehow it was not a reality. And I wouldn't simplify it to that sole dimension, but what is important is that there are parallel realities here, and how these are interconnected. That's something very interesting. So yeah, that was just one comment, and if you would like to add something, then I give you back the word. If not, then I will transition to our outro.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I know you have to move on, so just say really quickly. I mean, I think that's really interesting about the countryside and the city, but like young and old, like the contrasting life worlds of those, and you know, the privileged worker and the less privileged worker, and you know, it's interesting to kind of add that kind of complexity into the picture. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to thank to all of our presenters and all of our participants who joined us. I think it was a really inspiring afternoon. I've learned quite a lot. And as Kieran mentioned it, this occasion was having at least two purposes. One was to let's have a meeting and let's share some ideas as we are together, and also to prepare the ground a little bit for the spring conference, which should have been organized in 2020, but which couldn't have been organized in that year, couldn't have been organized last year. But we've been saying to ourselves that this spring, it is absolutely sure that it's possible. Now with the emergence of Omicron, of course, we've been a bit more doubtful, but still we are I think sure that spring we will be aiming for this conference. So I'm really encouraging everyone to take a look at the call for paper. The main topic of the spring conference will be solidarity. And I think it doesn't require too much explanation how is it related to all those social pathologies which we've been discussing here. And I think it's very important to think of social pathologies not just as they stand in themselves, but also as they are embedded in a social context of reactions to these pathologies. What is visible from them? Who are those who are considered to be the sufferers, bearing the consequences of these social distortions? What sort of support are available in the social context, and what are the pathologies of the forms of support as well? So all these questions are becoming more sharp in the post-pandemic or the present pandemic situation. Bert was asking the question at the beginning of the chat, what sort of post-pandemic, or I don't know what was the exact spiriting, but that's what it was addressed. So we will be dealing with these questions, and I hope it will be a great event as well. And we would like to invite you to come as well and send some abstracts, and let's think about these issues together. Okay, so thank you very much. Kieran, Bert, one last word, or we are saying farewell now?
Yeah, I would say let's go for drinks now. Can't share them really, but maybe in our minds we share a drink after this event together.
Okay.
And I might just say in finishing, because I mentioned it at the start, we have a book in mind.
Yeah, sure.
This and also the conference. So there's no rush with that, but for those of you who've participated in this conversation, you know, you might want to think about that, a short, pithy, nice piece that does something like adds to the critique, but also throws something ahead for us to think about in terms of hope and possibility and so on. And maybe for me, that the musical and film intermezzo really kind of captured that, you know, the sort of combination of melancholy and hope, and the reaching out, the presence of the void and liminality, and the attempt to communicate and speak and harmonize across that. So
definitely.
Okay, so shall we say thank you very much to everybody? That was wonderful and enjoyable and lovely, despite the encroaching darkness.
Maybe Kieran, a last remark. I made a recording of this session, so when people weren't able to attend, or you speak to people who want to have a look at this colloquium afterwards, there will be, hopefully I can put the whole recording on our website. So
that'd be great.
Yeah, hopefully.
Oh, hopefully see you all in Budapest in due course.
Sure.
In the meantime, I guess have a lovely weekend.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
It was
Bye-bye.
great. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Margaret.
And you too. Thank you so much. And Kieran, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a nice weekend. Take care now. Bye.